What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
Liz, to start this one, I have to acknowledge something that I'm sure you don't even remember that you've done. So, because I know this is just how you are. On August 2nd, 2018, I got an email back from you about my first book. And I said, I sent my first, like the manuscript to a number of people who I thought were really good, really smart. And I asked for feedback, and most people, and these are all great people, Liz, but most people write back, looks great, man. Congratulations. Be on your way. And I get it, because everybody's really busy. You probably don't even remember what you said, but I do. And I wrote it down, and I think it needs to be acknowledged in front of everybody here as well as anyone listening. And you said, my guidance for you, you need to refocus this book. Focus your source. You have a primary source, which is lessons from the world's top leaders, and your secondary source is yourself, your own experiences, color commentary. You can expand your audience this way. I suspect the book will experience greater success and longevity this way. Second, you said you need to rename this book. By the way, the title of the book at this time was called The Learning Leader Method. You said, the Learning Leader Method is not a compelling name. The Learning Leader is good, but only if that's what the book is about. Method is boring to me. It's not something I would read. Awesome. So, because it's like real feedback, and I loved it. It was a gift. Then on May 1st, 2019, you wrote me back again and said, you know what? I really like the phrase on page 3, welcome to management. I wonder if that might be a stronger title. I forwarded that email to my publisher at McGraw-Hill, and they said, that's it. And so I don't know if you even knew that. I haven't publicly talked to you about it. I just thought I should acknowledge you've had a massive impact on my life, and I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, well, I'm happy to help play in that. So I'm thrilled. And I have now a confession. I was remembering the name of your book because we talked about Welcome to Management. I just looked it up and I saw the cover of your book, and then I realized it had that like gorgeous blue burst on it. And then I looked at it, I'm like, oh, did I copy Ryan's burst on my book? And I don't think I did. If I did, it was super subliminal from seeing it years ago. But I'm like, man, well, it wasn't on purpose.
No, I love it. I'm honored. No, I love it. And I'm just glad that you're here. And I'm going to dig into impact players here as we go because it's the newest work. I know we'll also probably talk a little bit about multipliers and rookie smarts as well during our conversation, because we definitely have some fans here live with us. For the audio listeners, my friends, leaders within Insight Global are joining us. We're doing this as a live show. It's a lot of fun. And I think it's cool to have like build community by doing it live this way. So Liz, without further ado, I saw that you quoted Neil deGrasse Tyson, and when he said, what you know is not as important as what you think. And then you wrote, if you aspire to have greater influence, start thinking like an impact player. Don't just use the playbook, adopt the impact player mentality as your ethos. What would you say is the impact player ethos?
Well, the impact player ethos is about thinking about what is valuable to other people. Because we can't really, like, I think of impact, like if I think about as like a projectile, a missile or something, it's like, it's this combination of force and accuracy. And I think a lot of people bring force and they assume that being forceful, assertive, driving hard, working hard is impact, but actually impact is about hitting the right target. And so it's about thinking about what is most important, what is valuable. Like in some ways, the ethos is, I'm going to figure out what's important to the people that I serve, and then I'm going to make it important to me. I mean, I remember very much coming into the workforce going, here's what I want to do with my career, and here's what I want to do with my talents and skills, and here's what I want. And let me see if I can find some people who will let me do what I want. And what I find interesting, and I fortunately had a boss who's like, like, that's not the problem we're trying to solve, Liz. This is the problem we're trying to solve. Like, it would be great if you could help us here. I'm like, oh, yeah, I need to make myself useful, not important. And, you know, when we make ourselves useful, and I think it is kind of the essence of this mentality, is what can I do that is of greatest use and greatest value to the organization I'm part of, whether it's a partnership, a team, an entire company, a community. Like, how do I add value to what is most important right now? And when we do that, we make a huge impact. And we actually build a lot of influence, which allows us to end up doing the kinds of things that we wanted to do anyway.
You write about passion as well. And this has been thrown back and forth. You know, follow your passion, you won't work a day in your life, that type of talk, you know, which I think a lot of people, especially ones here, know that. Yeah, I don't know about that. What about for the person who does, I oftentimes at the end of these episodes ask for some career/life advice. And every once in a while, somebody will say that, like, find what you're passionate about and just go for that, you know, go for that. And I get it. I know their intentions are good. What do you think about this passion and find your passion for work versus making an impact versus trying to be useful?
Well, I have probably an opinion on this that is too strong. Like, it's like,
the stronger the better. Let's go.
Well, you know, I think it's junk food advice.
Yeah.
You know, it makes for great commencement speeches. Follow your passion, do what you're passionate about, pursue your passion. And, you know, it's sound advice when it comes to picking a vocation, picking a general path in life, and maybe choosing what company you want to work for, or choosing to start a company of your own. But when you are part of an organization, like, this can absolutely lead you down a dead end. And when the research I did for impact players was the exact opposite of the research I did for multipliers. Like, when I wanted to figure out what great leadership looked like, I interviewed the people who are on the receiving end of that leadership. And so when I wanted to figure out what are the most impactful and influential people do, I talked to managers and said, tell me about someone on your team who's like smart, talented, hardworking, but making a normal contribution, like solid, versus tell me about people who are smart, talented, hardworking, who are doing things of enormous value and impact. And I also asked about a smart, talented, hardworking person who's not making an impact, who's strangely under contributing. But so I ended up with 170 of these people considered impact players by some of the top managers in the top companies in the world. And one of the things they said was, it's not like they're pursuing their own agenda. They're passionate about problem solving. They make themselves passionate about what's important to us. You know, managers said things like, you know what, he learned me. This one manager at Target who oversees risk management, she's like, it's like, you know, Evan just figured out what was important to me and asked a lot of questions about how I think and how my bosses think and what's important. And he's like figuring out what I call it the win. Like, what's important right now, and then like bites onto that and stays on that. And so they weren't these kind of passionate prima donnas. It's that they channeled their energy to where there was energy inside the organization. And so it's not like they're not passionate. It's that they're not idiosyncratic about their passion.
One of the examples you use is Scott O'Neill. I talked to Scott on the show. Really good dude. Be Where Your Feet Are is the title of his book. But he started at a very low entry level job with the New Jersey Nets. And you share a story about how he goes in on a Saturday and the copy machine, this is years ago when copy machines were really important and you needed them in your office, and theirs was broken. And what happens when most people find a broken copy machine is they would just go up another floor or find a different one and go on to the next one. Whereas Scott started taking it apart and trying to fix it, and somebody saw this. Could you share more about that story and why this could be useful for us to know?
I think this story captures like both parts of this equation. So it's a Saturday, he's in there, he's going into work, but he sees the copy machine broken. He's fixed the copier at his parents' small business. And so he's, down on the ground, he's fixing the copier, he's all, covered in ink toner. And this is back in the day where, this could bring an organization to a halt. And I know this, I know what it's like. You go in and see a broken copier, like, I think I'll go up to the next floor. Like, I'll let someone else fix this. And he's fixing it. And John Spolstra comes into the office, who's the president of the organization. And it's John, right? Because I know there's John and his son. I think it's John Spolstra. And he's like, hey, he recognizes him as one of the new hires in the marketing department. He's like a marketing assistant or something. And he's like, what you doing? I'm fixing the copier. Well, why? Well, because it's broken. And he's like, come to my office. And then he's, John starts peppering him this question. So like, what do you think about this operation? Where do you think we can do a better job? And then the question comes to, hey, what do you want to do around here? He goes, well, I want to sell sponsorships. And he's like, great, you've been promoted. You're now selling sponsorships. He's like, when do I start? He goes, how about now? And he's like, your office will be right down the hall. He's like, man, I get an office. And I think it captures, like, it's this orientation of make yourself useful. Like, don't just do your job, do the job that needs to be done. And right then the job that needed to be done was fix the copier. But it's not just this, golly shucks, I'm just here to serve. Like, let me just do all the dirty work in the office. It's how he got noticed. And that created an opportunity for him. And I've experienced this myself, where the more that I, in some ways, subordinated my will and worked on what was important to the people I worked for, the more I got to have a say in things. And the more I worked on that agenda, the more I got to set the agenda. And I think it was one of my big ahas studying all of these impact players is that they create enormous value for others. Their orientation, much like the multiplier leader, is totally on other people. But all of that value they create comes back to them, which is probably not, it's not dissimilar to the multiplier leader who focuses on harvesting the intelligence and capability and growing the intelligence of others. But yet in the end, like their brilliance is multiplied as well.
This seems like it would be obvious, doesn't it, Liz, though? Because, hey, our company needs something done, I'm going to do it. And so I guess I think of the difference between a contributor and a high impact player. And you outlined the differences between those two throughout this book. But maybe it's just how I was brought up. I don't know. I'm curious. This seems to me like, well, obviously this is what you should do. I remember when I got my very first job, my dad said, your job is to make your boss's life better, whatever it takes, man. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so I tried to learn, how could I make his life better? How could I make it easier? What could I do? And in my case, I had a sales job. And I even asked him that, and he's like, well, if you crush your number, it would really help me out because it would make up for some of the underperformance, and also, be like a self-learner so you could do it on your own. Basically, he just wanted me to do my job and not have to talk to me. So we get it done. But it seems kind of obvious, or maybe I don't know, maybe it's because I'm fortunate to have cool parents. Is this not evident to people, Liz, that you need to be others focused on helping them get their work done?
So, Ryan, I think you do have cool parents, and I'm going to tell you a confession. Like, I'm going to just like dump a little bit of like
Please.
the neuroses of like a social science researcher. And my confession is, I have gone back and forth as I've been writing the book and now releasing the book. I have days where I'm like, oh, I think this is a really good book. Like, I'm proud of this work. I think it's full of useful insights. Good job. And then I have days where I'm like, this is the dumbest book in the whole world. Like, I actually need to put on the cover, like, please don't read this book. This is a stupid book. This is a completely unnecessary book. And I'm not really joking, because I think these conclusions for me feel so obvious and they don't need to be said. But every time I've confessed that to one of my friends, they've said, oh, I do think it needs to be said. I don't think they're being nice to me. And here's why. Because even if we've heard some of these things at, our mama's knee, the world right now is telling us the exact opposite of this. We are being told, follow your passion, take care of yourself. We are being told, build your brand. See, the impact players that I studied, they weren't building their brand as much as they were getting a reputation built. So I think we have this misconception about brand, like everyone wants to build a brand, but a brand is not something you do for yourself. A brand is the byproduct of a reputation. And, a brand is what the market says, this is how we experience your product or you. And so you've done a set of things, have maybe built a brand, but you're not around trying to like brand yourself. Everyone's running around trying to brand themselves. And I think what the impact players are doing is they're building a reputation. They're building a reputation as a utility player, meaning, I'm not going to just do my job. I'm going to do the job that needs to be done. They're building a reputation as a team leader. Like, when the roles are unclear and everyone else is waiting for role clarification from senior execs, I'm going to step up and lead where I can, but I'm also going to step back and let others lead. Mm-hmm. So I'm building a reputation as a team leader and a trusted player. When things get really rough and other people escalate issues, I'm going to hold on to those and build support for those. So I'm going to build this they end up building a reputation as like a clutch player. Yeah. Someone you can, no look pass to, someone you can trust with the ball in the most critical like game moments, but they're not out there trying to like build their me brand. And so I think in almost every one of these things that I go, man, this seems obvious. Like, why wouldn't we just do it? I think we can point to massive counter forces out in social media and junk food career advice that like seems good. Like, it's me and cotton candy. I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need right now. It's so good. It's cotton candy. It's candy corn. And then you're left empty, and taken down by it. And, I think one of the things I hope the book does is dispel a lot of misguided notions about how to be successful.
Yeah. Matt JS here in the chat, when doing the job that needs to be done, do you have advice on making sure it's actually noticed? What do you think about that?
That's one of the things that was a constant concern for me for the book. Like, I kept asking, and here's the question that I would ask when I was doing the interviews is, because like what you describe, like, it's great because like you see that person doing it, but what about the missing impact player? What about the person who's doing it and maybe is in a behind the scenes job, or maybe is more introverted, or maybe is different than you, or maybe comes from an underrepresented population and their work can very easily go unnoticed. And almost all of the managers I asked that was like, no, that's not, oh yeah, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. There's a little section in the book about evidencing your contribution. And I think some people fit a type that easily get noticed and they become go-to people. Mm-hmm. Right hand, they get deputized inside organizations. But I think for other people, we have to do just a little bit of, and I think fundamentally the onus is on the manager to see hidden contribution.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I believe that's the job of the manager, but it doesn't hurt. And we are savvy when we help people see our contribution. And let me just offer two sort of visions for this. One would be a great waiter. So like, what does a great waiter do? So like a waiter is a background job. Like they're supposed to take your order, ensure your order's delivered, make sure you're satisfied, and they're not supposed to be in your face. So they kind of like stay in the background, they get the job done, but like, what does a great waiter do? Like they're letting you know very subtly what they're doing for you. Like, oh, you know what? I put a rush on your order because I heard that you were going to the theater. You know, is there anything else I can do for you? Oh, you know what? I brought an extra plate because you guys look like you might want to share that dessert. Oh, here's some spoons. They're very gently letting you know what they're doing for you. And then the real savvy ones, of course, they do just a little bit of extra on that right before, and I think everyone could probably fill in the blank on this. Yeah, right before they hand you the check. Mm-hmm. And it's not that they're bragging, showing off, they're not in your face, they're not like doing this overtly, they're just reminding you of what is being done in your service by them. And I think sometimes we need to use some of the practices of a savvy waiter, or the other one that I love is Intel back in, I'm getting the decade wrong on this. Was it the 80s that they began this campaign? You know, so Intel produces the microprocessors that make all the laptops run so fast, but they're like a microprocessor inside a casing, inside a laptop. Nobody knows about it except tech nerds. And they have to find a way to create more value associated with their product. And they launched this campaign. Some of you may remember it. It's called Intel Inside. And what they were saying is like this laptop that's sitting in front of you, like it's running on this really amazing 46 microprocessor built by Intel. And the ones that have this are more valuable. And the market charged more for these. And what they were doing is they were just elevating, like, hey, there's something you don't see that's valuable that we just want to let you know about.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I saw, Liz, that I noticed to be in common is the fact that the high impact players yearned for feedback. You write top contributors in your study didn't seek constant validation. They sought guidance, always there. And I found this to be the case. The people who seemed, it's so backwards. I'll explain quickly. I'm sure you get the same thing. The people who need like the coaching the most or need the most feedback don't seem to ask for it. It's the ones who are already like the 9.5s, right? They're like right there, but they're constantly seeking, hey man, how can I get better? What can I do? What, can you take a look at this? What do you think? It's amazing to me how that seems to be common. It seems like the research backs this up from my anecdotal evidence of what I've found, that people who are high impact players are always out there, not seeking validation, but wanting guidance and feedback so they could improve.
Yeah, they had such in some ways, it's a subtly different orientation to feedback, but, you know, first of all, they operate on the assumption that they're off target. And I think it's a good assumption for us to operate on, because I think most of us, like I tend to operate on assumption, like I'm doing it right, but I need to look for places where I'm doing it wrong. But, you know, if you're mostly doing it right, I can convince myself I don't really need to look in the corners and the cracks for where I'm doing it wrong. But if you operate under the assumption that the world is changing fast, and usually like by the time you're midway through a project, the goals have changed, your targets have changed. And it's like operating more like a violinist who starts every performance by assuming they're off tune, you know, knowing that their instrument needs to be tuned before they perform. So they're constantly recalibrating. And it's not that they're always off, but if we assume we're off, we then need to look for guidance on how do I get back on track. And, so I think their fundamental assumption is that I need to constantly tune the instrument. Second is what differentiated them was not how they received feedback. It's that they beat their managers and clients to it and they asked for it. And I really think, even though there's such great work being done on feedback with Radical Candor and Thanks for the Feedback by, so that's Kim Scott's book and Sheila Heen and Doug Stone's book, Thanks for the Feedback. It's still hard for managers to do this. And I think we fundamentally don't like the part of giving feedback that feels like we're judging. And, it's like, ooh, how do I broach this conversation? There's no on-ramp to that. It's awkward. And how do I initiate this? But the most impactful people are initiating it. So it's so easy for them to receive this. There's no awkward moment. It's like, oh, I need to sit down and talk with you about this. They're just like, hey, how was that? What could I have done better? Did you get what you needed? What could I do next time that was just a little bit better? So there's none of this awkward, uncomfortable, ugh.
I think too, Liz, as the person who's receiving the feedback, I think you have to be prepared. And this is one of the things I've messed up and tried to get better at. So when you seek out guidance or seek out feedback, and please coach me on this, how I respond to the feedback is everything. So if I go to Bert and I'm like, hey, Bert, can you give me feedback on how I did with my speech? And he starts critiquing me like he should, like I'm asking for. And I immediately get defensive, or I immediately start explaining why I did the dumb thing that he told me I did. Well, what do you think Bert's going to say? Or what do you think he's going to think? He's going to say, Ryan can't take it. No more feedback for him. Or I have to he doesn't want to give me fake feedback, so he just won't give me any. And now I've just ruined a great feedback source because I've proven to him that I can't take it. Right. And so I think we have to prepare ourselves to take the critical feedback, to pause, to listen, to take it in, to be grateful for the gift of that feedback, as opposed to, because I've had this happen to me when I'm on the other end. They ask for the feedback, I give it, and then it's like 4 excuses in a row. And I'm like, all right, it doesn't feel like they actually want it. They got advice to seek it, but then they didn't follow. Their execution was poor. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's, I'm always looking for the easy way on everything. And I think there's a hard way to get good at receiving feedback. And then there's an easier way. So the hard way is to stay open-minded, to take it in, to process it, to thank people for it. I still find that hard.
Really?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem that hard, is it?
Well, because someone's telling me what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And then you want to be defensive, well, wait a minute, my intent was this. I find that hard.
Okay.
Here's the easy way. The easy way is to stop getting feedback on you and your performance and start getting guidance on your work. So here's what makes it easy is you separate out, don't seek feedback for you. And that's how, 99% of us think about feedback is I'm getting performance feedback. I'm giving someone feedback on how they are doing, emphasis on they. But what happens is when we shift our orientation and we ask for guidance on our work, what it does is feedback becomes information. And it's neither positive nor negative. It's not a judgment. It's like a thermostat. Its job is to calibrate, how hot is it in the room? We know we want it to be 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So we take a read on that and it's 68. So we've got to warm the room. We've got to warm the room versus, it goes to, it's constantly off. And so it's not saying ooh, you're warm. Room, you are warm. That is wrong. You are off. It's giving information to say warm versus cool things. And when we can separate ourselves from our work and invite people to give us information about our work, it changes entirely. Let's say I do a webinar for our client and I say, well, gee, how did I do? I'd like to get feedback. Like, first of all, they're going to be like, Liz, that was so great.
Right.
And if they really had something like, well, you didn't do this well. Ugh, versus, hey, you know what? How was that webinar received? Like, what insights can you offer that would make that webinar better next time? Then all the focus is on the output, the product, the work. And it's just so easy to sit back and say, oh yeah, help me make this thing better.
Yeah. Liz, one of the things that we all here are trying to do is build high impact teams. A lot of leaders here who have to make the critical decisions of who to hire, who to fire, promotions, right? All of the team building stuff. And you write in chapter 8 about building high impact teams. And you talk about the dream team from 1992, the men's Olympic basketball team, the NASA rover team was a dream team. The Saturday Night Live cast with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler was a dream team. So you mentioned some of these dream teams. I'd love for you, if possible, to take what you've learned through your research on both all of these other worlds and bring it to this world in the business space of building a high impact team within a company. So let's say we're a mid-level manager. We're not the CEO. We're not an individual contributor. We're somewhere in between. What are some general pieces of advice you give to that person for how they can start building or rebuild a high impact team?
Well, first of all, I think framing as a high impact team can be helpful because, like a high performing team, again, all the emphasis is on what people produce. Here's one of the things I've learned. I've learned it studying these multiplier leaders. I've certainly learned it studying diminishing leaders, is that people, like, I think there's a truth in all of this, that people come to work every day desperately wanting to contribute all of their capability and their intelligence. And what happens when they encounter leaders who only receive a fraction of that? It's frustrating, it's exhausting. Like, people want to contribute at their fullest and they want to do work that is impactful. Like, I don't know that anyone like wakes up and says, I really want to be high performing, but I want to have impact. I think it's something that people are drawn to do, and it's regenerative. It's like the regenerative brakes on my car, which is like, it's creating energy in that process. It gives back to all the contributors. And I think when we frame it as building a high impact team, it's not a concept that like there can only be one impactful person here. Like, you can actually have a team where everyone has different roles. And even everyone has different capabilities. You don't have to be an absolute superstar to be having impact in your work. Like, it's not like a team where like, oh, there's only one MVP. Sorry, this person's it. Like, yeah, you're valuable, but you're not like the most valuable. You really can build a team where everyone is contributing at their fullest, doing work that matters, and raising the level of play for everyone on the team. So I think the framing of it's important. Like, if you want to build a high impact team, like the fast, cheap way to do this is hire people who already have the mindsets of these impact players. And there's a chart in the book that I'll probably put on the website somewhere, but we looked at all of the mindsets and the behaviors of impact players. And I'm like, you know what? I know that not all of those are easy to develop. So I queried the Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches, a group I'm part of, top coaches in the world, and got all of their input on like which of these are the least coachable kinds of mindsets and behaviors, and which of them are the most coachable based on your real world experience. And some of them are pretty easy to coach and develop and teach. Some of them aren't. They're kind of things you probably, they're based on maybe early career experiences or things, your cool parents taught you.
What are some of each?
Oh, okay. Let me give you my favorite. Well, first is, I think, this worldview of, do you see ambiguity and uncertainty as a threat, or do you see it as an opportunity? like that would probably be the thing I would hire for.
They
The
wear
other,
opportunity goggles, right? You say they wear opportunity goggles.
Mhm.
I
And
like that
honestly,
phrase.
and it's about opportunity goggles. And what I like about that metaphor is I don't think many of us like ambiguity and uncertainty. Like I personally kind of hate it, but I like being in it because I like changing it. Like my thing that I just soak up is going into chaotic, ambiguous situations and putting structure and clarity to it. And so I don't like it. I hate it. But I see it as an opportunity to create a framework, to do something useful, to add clarity or simplify a lot of chaos. This is probably the number one thing I would hire for. The other thing that's pretty fundamental is internal locus of control. And I know I'll go through each of them because I know it's very fundamental to the work that's done by this group. And it's like, do you think that you are in charge of your life? Do you have an external locus of control, meaning other people in charge and I'm acted upon, or do I feel like I fundamentally am in charge? Like if I could give a piece of like unsolicited career advice to everyone, it would probably be, you know what, you probably have a lot more power than you think you have in almost every situation. And I have found that just by assuming that I have control over myself and that I can influence almost any situation that I'm in, even when I'm sitting across the table from really powerful and intimidating people, I'm like, I have the ability to influence that. Like, I think it's just this assumption of personal power really allows us to do the job that's needed versus just do our job, to seek guidance because we have personal power to affect that. That's another one. And sort of an orientation, I call it informality, but it's like how do you see the world through a hierarchical lens or do you see the world through a network lens? And that one is a little bit more inculcated. And then another one is, I thought this was so surprising. I'm not sure I completely believe it, but one of the things we found that impact players do is they just make work light. And it's not that they take on other people's work, it's that they bring levity and fun to the work. Now, they're not all comedians, but they make hard things easier by just not creating drama and politics, by being easy to work with and just being fun. Like we like working with fun people. And that is one that, according to this group of coaches, is not particularly coachable.
I think it's a highly underrated skill to bring is when working with others trying to get started doing kind of stuff that I do, I'm like, try to be easy to work with. Like try not to make it really hard, try not to take forever to respond, like basic things, just try to be easy to work with. It'll get you farther than you may think. Liz, one other question before I open it up here. And this is always on my mind. It has been for the last few years. And that is the fact that this is kind of meta, but the learning that happened because you forced people to respond, you asked them questions, and you said one of the things that surprised you was that they told you how much they learned through being interviewed by you. And so this happens when writing a book, this happens when giving a speech, this happens when teaching. This is why I always push leaders to be teaching, to be writing, to be documenting their thoughts, because that's when clarity happens, when you're forced to teach others. And you said that you found this when went through your interview process, that they commented to you all the time that they learned so much through going through this. So maybe you could take that lens and share how that could help all of us as leaders to put us in the position that we can be learning by answering these types of questions, by teaching, by writing, by sharing with other people.
I think what the leaders learned, so I didn't teach them anything during this interview process. They learned by framing back their own thoughts to us. And in particular, when we ask, like, who's someone who's having an enormous impact, and they're like, let's say, it's Sandra. then I say, well, why Sandra? Oh, well, that's a good question. And then they start to articulate that, and then they're like, well, like what's the difference between Sandra and Meredith? Oh, and they're seeing that they're actually pretty small, subtle differences, but that they make this big impact. And the aha they had is they're like, you know what? I've just like kind of told you what makes a really high value, high impact contributor. And I've never written that down before. Like they'd never kind of articulated their own performance model. And, it's probably because we get fed, our companies feed us like, oh, here's our competency model, here's our values. So managers don't ever have to think like, what do I really value? What's important? And the other question we ask them, and I do these kind of things just because they're so entertaining to me. But one of the things I insist on adding to this kind of litany of questions was, what is it that people do that work for you or around you that you most love? Like kind of what tickles your fancy, like what makes you love being a boss. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm also going to ask you what really annoys you. Like what are your pet peeves? Like what just gets your goat, And they're like, really? I get to tell you this? And at first they're like, well, I don't have any. And they're like, well, okay, maybe I do. And then they're just like emoting all of these things. Like this bugs me when people send me long email notes and they've read the whole thing and they don't even bother putting a summary sentence. Like they've read it. How hard would it be to write down a summary sentence? Like you can tell this is one of my pet peeves. And so they're like, I've never told anyone that. I'm like, okay, so people are just doing that over and over. And you've never said, by the way, like it makes my job easy when you do this. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should tell them that. One of my favorite things in the book is like kind of a list of here's the things that managers most love. Here's the things that managers most hate. And you want to build influence and credibility, do a lot of the things that they love and very few of the things they hate. That's kind of the simple
It makes sense. Liz, I want to open it up and for questions, and Sam is going to go first. Fire away, man.
Well, first of all, Liz, thank you for allowing us to join and letting us listen. This has been awesome for our company. So we all really appreciate it. But the question that I had for you, just in listening and hearing, I loved what you said about guidance on work and focusing on the output. I think that's brilliant advice. I think there are, though, those times where you still have to make it personal because there's some feedback for that person that you need to give. So I was just curious to pick your brain on what advice do you have on, really, I loved your phrase you used of the on-ramp, how do you go about giving that personal feedback, or what's your on-ramp or your style there?
Well, I don't have to do I try to avoid a lot of personal feedback. And I think what managers can do is just give people feedback on their work. And the frame, it's actually the same frame that I would use as a manager that I would use in like receiving it, is feedback is information to help you calibrate your work. That's all it is. Because we, like our mental model is feedback is about you, and it's a judgment. It's an evaluation of how you're doing. Most of us resist receiving and resist giving that. I don't want to who am I to tell you this? And particularly if you're a young manager, for years, I was this young manager. I'm like, who am I to tell someone 10 years older than me, how they're doing? They don't want to hear that. But what I'm doing as a leader is I'm giving someone information about their work. As simple as do more of this and less of this. This would make the work better. And I think if we can do that, it just it's easy to receive. It's kind of we're just working on the same thing. We opened it with Ryan saying that I had given him some feedback about the book that was helpful. If I'm taking myself back to when I read the manuscript, and when I wasn't like, Ryan, I'm going to tell you whether I think you're going to be a good author or not. how would I know this? And why would I do that? Like, I don't have enough information. I'm just saying, here are words on a page, and here's some thoughts about what would make this piece of work stronger. And I think when we can do it, it's like, oh man. Yeah, I get uncomfortable, like if someone's going to give me feedback about me, whether it's great or not, it's just like, I'd much rather it be around the work. And I learned this one the hard way. There's a little story in the book that we probably don't have time for, but it's where I think I got a wake up call, which is like, hey, Liz, it's not about you. It's about making the work better.
Thank you, Liz. Joey, go ahead.
My name is Joey. I'm a regional manager for Insight Global. And a huge fan of multipliers. I think I've read The Talent Magnet like 10 or 15 times. And I'm really excited to read Impact Players. And I tried to order on Amazon. I can't get it till October, but I'm very excited. I just want to know how would someone be both an impact player and a multiplier at the same time? It sounds like impact player is like I'm just going to do this. Or does that person exist? If so, and what would their characteristics be?
Well, I think, okay, so this is a super fun question because it's got some texture to it. So when you work like an impact player, you are very much seen as a leader, and it puts you on a very natural path to leadership because you're already leading. You're leading without a lot of formal authority. So it puts you on that path, but it can be a little bit of a rocky transition to go from being like the high impact player to leader, because you really have to realize like, okay, it's not about your performance anymore. Like, you've now got to take the mindset and the mentalities are very consistent with multipliers, but you've got to realize that your scope is now changed and it's about getting impact from your whole team. Like, I very much remember going from probably what might have been like a bit of an impact player mentality to being a leader. And for me, it was a rough transition. It took about 6 months before I had the epiphany. I'm like, I think I wrote about it at multipliers. I'm like, wow, why am I still here at the office and everyone else is home? Why am I doing everyone else's work? Why is all the hard work flowing to me? Like, why am I doing everything that falls between the lines? Like, oh yeah, because maybe, Liz, it's not about you. And it's not about what you can get done. It's about what you can get done on your team. And I got some good coaching from a boss. I was very confused at the time. He came by my office, Rand, and he sat down. He said, Liz, I just want to let you know, as a new manager, that as far as I'm concerned, you can sit in your office all day and read novels, as long as your team is performing well. And I'm like, I didn't quite see the metaphor in this. I'm like, that's like a massive violation of my work ethic. Like, why would I sit and read novels? Like, that seems lazy. Like, and I was like, what is he saying? What does he mean by that? And then I got the metaphor in what he was saying is, it's not about you and your productivity and what you can accomplish. It's about the impact and output of the team. So I think that can be a really rough transition for some people, or maybe it's just me. But the way of thinking and working are very congruent. Like, sort of like two sides of a coin.
Emma, go ahead.
Yeah. If you can reflect back on your career, of course, your own personal experience, and then all the incredible leaders you've talked to, is there one or two methodologies that have just struck you and stuck with you? Where they could have been a light bulb moment or something you learned over time that you could share?
Well, there's things that I'm now learning. Like, I don't know that there's been a philosophy that like has run consistent that we haven't already talked about. But I think one of the things I'm learning, and I just had a conversation with a man named Keith Kroc, who is the founder and CEO of Ariba and founder and CEO of DocuSign, and just served as the Undersecretary of State for the United States, and just an amazing, like truly an amazing leader. And he and I just had this really interesting conversation a week ago about like the art of leadership is about what you hold loosely and what you hold tightly. And we all know like the tightly wound leader, which is like, oh, they're like really intent. They end up micromanaging and it's got to be a certain way. And they're just like really just like tense and tight about everything. And then we have like the hippie managers who are like, hey, yeah, knock yourself out, be creative, do something useful. But like the art form is like, there are things that you hold really tight to. Maybe clarity about what success looks like, or values, or certain things that just need to be done exactly right. And you're very, very tightly intentioned about it. And then there's other things that you delegate in their extreme and you trust. And it can be confusing to get there because you think, well, wait a minute, there's certain things I'm like so tightly wound about and so things that I'm so open about. But I think it's knowing what to hold tightly and what to hold loosely is, I think part of what I'm learning is what mastery looks like. And that might have not made any sense at all, because this is for me like a very like emerging insight.
Yeah, interesting. Matt, go ahead. We have one more. Matt J, you wrote it in there. Go ahead.
Thanks. And Ryan, Liz, great insights. Thank you for following your muse and sharing with us. So Liz, I have a team of maybe 15 people, and a lot of times I find that there are several high impact players on the team, but they have to work with many other teams across the organization. And I find my challenge is often protecting them, helping them to stay in that mental state, and helping them continue to operate as though they are high impact players, and wondering if you have insight on how to protect them and maybe tug the entire organization along in that direction, because it's many other teams that they're working with.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, because like when I first hear the word protect, I go, oh yeah, that's good. You need to protect them so that they have an environment to work. But then I go, ooh, protect. Protect is one of the ways that we end up accidentally diminishing. And when I certainly look back on my corporate experience, I probably over-rotated on protecting. It was this like sense of, oh, yeah, and this is true in any large organization, whether it's Oracle, Insight Global, Procter & Gamble, Google, what have you, is like, there's politics and there's like some nefarious kind of players and forces out there. And it's easy to get into the sense of, I need to protect my team from that. And I'm going to create a microcosm, like a sweet little culture inside here where it's like a great place to work. But what happens is we can become like the protective parent, that we become the shield. And so other people can do good work and can focus, but they don't build muscle that comes from dealing with difficult things. And, they get a false sense of the organization, or they feel weak and the manager is strong. So like, I would caution all of us, like when we're in that mode of protecting people, have your antenna up for how could that be diminishing to your team. My colleague Sean Vanderhoven here at the Wiseman Group, he's doing some really fun research on how do managers sort of protect, I don't know that he's using that word, but protect people's workspace, like their mental space to work, and like buffer them from distractions, not from difficulties, but from interference in that space. And I think that's probably a more productive model. Like maybe the thought that I would leave, given our time, is that I learned this when I was like, okay, let me boil multipliers down, or like the aha came on, like, you know what, I can boil multipliers down. And so for those of you who haven't read the book, like skip it, and I'll just give you the 2.5 word version of the book. Is what great leaders do that bring out the best in others is they create an environment that is equal parts safety and stretch. Like, there's a lot about creating psychological safety and like a great place to work and all of its inclusion and belonging. Like that's all about creating a safe place. But we all know managers who are like all safety, no stretch. Like, oh, we love you, put their arm around you, but they never ask you to do anything hard. Like, I just kind of protect you. And like, this is like a good little team. We love each other. But then we all know managers who are all stretch, no safety. and that's equally diminishing. But like the best leaders are constantly like creating safety, but then stretching people. Like, I'm going to make you comfortable, but it's kind of for the whole purpose of enabling you to be uncomfortable and ragged and hard and make mistakes and be pushed and stretched. But there's safety in that. And so like the best environment is to create safety and stretch. And if we try too hard to protect, people might have a lot of safety, but no stretch, not as much growth as you could give them. But we could talk about that a lot further and have a really fun conversation.
Liz, thank you so much for your time. The book's called Impact Players: How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. Just an amazing amount of research done with some fantastic storytelling. Highly encourage people to check it out. Comes out in a little bit. Liz, thanks again. And I'm so grateful for your friendship and feedback, and certainly looking forward to us continuing our dialogue as we both progress.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to talk with you and to have lots of positive views of the work that you guys do at Insight Global. And if any of you have like wanted to start on impact players a little bit early, you can get the first chapter by pre-ordering the book, and then I could like get you a galley or something if you wanted to start early. So like wink, wink, contact me.
Thank you.
Just if you're like, no, I'm ready to go now.
I bet we have some of those. It's really good. Thanks so much, Liz. I know we're out of time. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being here. It was really fun to see you all. I like the community aspect of this. This is really cool. Thank you.
Good talking to you.
All right.